Let's say good morning now to the Admiral Bill Stubblefield as we welcome in our co-hosts.
Good morning, Rob. Great to be here as always.
Wonderful to have you with us, sir.
Thank you.
And Maria Lawrenson.
Good morning.
Good
How are you?
Good to have you. Turn your mic
this way.
Yeah, beautiful.
Am I good?
Oh,
okay.
marvelous.
There we
Yes.
go. Ready to roll.
Absolutely spectacular. And Maria, fresh off a huge performance on Friday night at the hospice fundraiser, where she is, of course, the star attraction every single year. Maria, once again, you pulled off a magnificent evening.
It was a great event. You know, we were obviously pretty nervous because of, well, we did have a monsoon, maybe a tornado come through. Yeah. But we sort of pivoted. The team at the Bavarian, our volunteers, just took it all in stride, and we had a really good night. Interestingly, the major thunderstorm came through right as our auction was starting, and usually that's a little bit difficult to get people sort of under control, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
And we had big plans to shut down the bars during that so that we could do that. But then when the storm came, we didn't think we would be able to do that. So, but everybody really had no alternative but to come inside at 8 o'clock when we started. So
most people would want to turn the bars up when the auction starts, just to get people a little bit lubed up.
We did that. We did that. Yeah, it was a really good night. It was phenomenal. The support that Hospice of the Panhandle has from the community is just stellar. We are so grateful and humbled. And I told the team yesterday, Monday morning meeting, that it really starts with the care. We have a lot of good volunteers who are not bashful about asking people to support the mission, but the mission would not be the mission if it weren't the care that starts first. So.
Yeah, over 300 volunteers with hospice, and the event that Maria is talking about provides us money to do a lot of things we could not do if we were just dependent upon Medicare and Medicaid, which is where the bulk of the money comes from. But a lot of the extra stuff that means so much to the families and the patients is a direct consequence of these money-making.
And you serve on the board of hospice,
I
Bill,
do,
since
yes,
you're
I
interested
do,
in
yes.
that. Yeah. So, well, congratulations
Well,
to both
thank
of you.
you. Thank you very much.
Job well done.
We're looking forward to it. Like some events, we're getting ready to do our sort of wrap up and plans for next year and so forth. So,
well, very nice. Our first guest is a guest we've had on the program many times. 17 years ago, Ann Montague conducted her first interview of a Rosie the Riveter. She was so inspired by that interview of Garnet Koslick that she vowed to spend the rest of her life telling people about Rosie the Riveters, the 6 million women who were paid to work on the home front to supply everything American troops needed, from shoes to ships, during World War II. At that time, Ann was in her late 60s. Today, she's in her mid-80s and has started a national movement that does not blame but guides people to do something to follow the legacy of Rosie's. And Ann joins us via telephone. Ann, good morning and welcome back.
Good morning, Rob. How are you this morning?
Excellent, Ann. Your phone connection is perfect, by the way. You sound wonderful.
Good. Oh, very good.
Yeah. We're going to have you on the program over the course of the next year for a series of these interviews of the American Rosie movement that started in Kanawha County and included many West Virginia counties, then women in the Quad State area, and then indeed expanded to people in places across America and internationally. You were on the ground floor of this movement, Ann, so congratulations to you for having the gumption to do this.
It's been somewhere between a pleasure and a nervous breakdown, but we are here, and we are, after 17 years, very, very sure that we can do better than we're doing now in terms of unifying America.
We've talked a lot about different Rosies that you've helped bring on this program, but not a lot about you. Where did you grow up in West Virginia, and what was your childhood like, and how did it contribute to this?
Good question. I grew up in Huntington. My father was in the military, 20 years older than my mother, and had been in World War I. We moved in with my grandparents while he was in the military, and I had a wonderful experience with essentially extended family, with living with grandparents and a cousin and my sister, who was very early on dying of cancer. And I got to know my grandparents really well, and I just consider that an immense blessing. We experienced the war. I was born in 1939, so we experienced the war together, everything from rationing to being really concerned about, which neighbor was gone to war and who was going to be in the obituary the next day. It was I'm really glad I had that experience of being born before the war and remembering pretty clearly, like I remember Victory Japan Day, September 2nd, 1945, and I started school the next day. So what's happened is, if you look at that as a beginning, then I think it's a very comforting experience for me to go back to that, and in my life with those same memories. It feels as though it's something it's meant to be, to start it with the actuality of the war and then to end it with memories of women who were pretty much ignored until somewhat recently. And the experience of growing up in Huntington was good.
And we've had people on who have actually been riveters and some women who have not. And they make a distinction in regards to this Rosie the Riveter movement. Quickly will tell you, I was not a riveter. I did this, but I was never a riveter. Why the distinction? And then ultimately, instead of Rosie the Riveters, it's now just kind of generally called in a generic fashion Rosies.
Good, very good. The issue is that there was a song that came out in 1942, and it was just alliteration, Rosie the Riveter, the two R's. And it caught on a little bit then, but actually the name Rosie the Riveter was not known by the women at the time. There was the song, but people just never called them. They were women ordnance workers, and end of story. But what's happened in most recently years is that when I started this work 17 years ago and ran an ad in the paper very soon after, a lot of the women did not come forward because they weren't riveters. They thought they had to be riveters to be acknowledged. And so we lost an awful lot of stories because women always felt kind of like inferior because they weren't really riveters, when the work they did was all over the place, making tents, making food, producing the food, and canning the food, everything from again, shoes to ships. So all of these women, anybody who really seriously worked for the war, effort through the war, would be called a Rosie. So we dropped the word riveter because we were only getting riveters coming to us when the bulk of the work was done by women in many, many, many types of job classifications.
So, Anne, quick question then. What was the distinguishing characteristic then? Because just a little bit of history, my mother worked as a welder during the war.
Okay.
She would have never considered herself, I don't think. I mean, we never talked about her being a Rosie or a riveter, or she was just like, I was a welder, and this is what I did to do my part. So talk a little bit about the distinctions and where the line was drawn, if you will.
I'm not sure there was a line drawn because, you see, at the time, the word Rosie the Riveter just didn't exist. Actually, a poster was drawn through the war of a woman in the Westinghouse factory near Pittsburgh. But in the long run, she didn't even know until, I think it was 1952, and her daughter said, "This is you." So, in other words, both the music and the poster, the women didn't pick up on these. They didn't call themselves Rosie the Riveters. So that's, again, why we have decided just to call it the Rosie Movement. Another reason we call it the American Rosie Movement is it is positive. It's Rosie. Hopefully, sometimes when you say Rosie, it means you've got on rose-colored glasses and you're not being realistic.
Yeah, I have a picture of my mother and her best friend, Franny, in the factory with their arms around each other,
Really?
smiling. And, while it wasn't a happy time, I think they made the best of it and
did.
recognized that in some small way they were making a difference. So.
And that they actually, I've heard that word sister many times. They felt very close to their workers. And the odd thing was they didn't feel so close emotionally. They just were proud to work together toward a common goal. And, there were some who were really friends, and they kept friendships all their lives. But mostly when they got home again, it was time to go back to a normal life, start having children, and essentially be a good citizen. And they didn't have like the VFW or the American Legion, so there was no common pulling together after the war. Even my mother, who inspected lenses in Huntington, she would try. I would ask her as a child, "Now tell me exactly what you did at the factory," and my stepfather would speak up and say, "You're embarrassing me. You did nothing compared to what we men faced." And so basically, it's been not so much this whole 17 years have been not so much just what they did in the war, but we're bringing back that kind of sisterhood. We had beautiful sisterhood between women who worked on different projects together. They would call themselves the Three Musketeers, or two would pair up and call themselves sisters and that sort of thing. I would love to have your mother's history. Do you have? I will give you our email address.
Okay. I will get in touch for sure.
A team at American, TAM, like yay team.
Mm-hmm.
Team at AmericanRosieMovement.org.
Okay.
And I'd love to know more about her, and we'll make a folder on her and anything that you know, even if it seems coincidental or not relevant. You'd be surprised what little things come together.
Thank you.
Very nice. Bill.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Good morning, Ann. You and I are of the same generation, so we're born about the same time.
That means we're old and determined, right?
Well, yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Determined I get, I think.
But what we tend to forget about World War II is that it came on the heels of the Great Depression,
Yes,
and there was
that's
there's an attitude that was built up over those 8 to 10, 12 years that was tough times, but yet people survived. But people came together. People survive by sharing and working together. We've lost a lot of that now.
Yes, we have.
Why do you think it's so important to keep promoting the roses, the Riveter of Roses, and which in effect reflects a time that has passed?
It couldn't be a better question, Bill, because our goal is to get America to unify. We've been hearing for 20 years now that we need to unify in America, but nobody comes up with any kind of idea. I'm not saying this is the best idea. I don't know. There could be others, but I can tell you that over the 17 years I've been doing this work, we are very aware that what the women want to be their legacy is not that they made armaments through the war. It was necessary. What the women would say to me is, I did what I had to do in the factory or on the farm or in the shipyard or whatever. I did what I had to do. They weren't proud of making armaments. They were proud of helping to win the war. But when it really comes down to it, the legacy that these women want to be remembered for is pulling together, doing highest quality work, which is really important, and doing it in a spirit of cooperation. They did not fight amongst themselves. I never heard a catty story. I would ask at the end of an interview, can you, name something that was maybe kind of negative that you remember? And they would talk about, somebody's not letting them see a ship launch that they worked on, but they never talked about having a bad relationship with other workers. This whole thing of unity is the leading concept that we are moving forward with. And as a matter of fact, we quote we quote Woody Williams, who was on our board for the first maybe 5 or 6 years, and he said, "We did it together." And we even have that on a monument in a park that the women designed in St. Albans, West Virginia. And then there was a Rosie that I was extremely close to. Her name was Nancy Sipple. I hope I can get somebody to write a script about her role in this movement. But her quote was, "We pulled together then, we can do it again, it's our only hope." And for whatever that's worth, I think that you are asking the key question. We have changed cultures almost, we're so different. As a matter of fact, I often say that one of the important things about the Rosies is they lived through the century of human history that has seen more change than any other century in human history. And the Depression, oh my gosh, even I remember the Depression. I seriously remember, feed sack dresses. My grandfather would buy, chicken feed, and the feed would be in this very loose cotton material that then Mother made into dresses for me and my sister. All kinds of things that the women remember. So yes, we have now had these basically 80 years of history. But one of the things that, have changed, but one of the things that we don't really recognize is what's basic to all of us. What is the commonality between us? And I believe that the people really want to hear human stories, and some of these stories are wonderful. Most of them are. Every woman had a story, but some were just outstanding. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
you did very nicely, Ann. But let me carry that one step farther. As you go through your interviews, I'm sure there's a lot of points being made about the pride they took, their comradeship, and pulling together, all of those. But was there an element of these interviews of where they expressed some regret? I'm specifically referring to the fact that after the war was over, the men came back, and there was a competition for these jobs, and a lot of the women were literally forced out of the jobs, going back to the home, the traditional role. How much of that, bitterness is probably too strong a word, but how much of that thought carries through the interviews?
Actually, very little. What we found was they knew their job was to help win the war. Their job was not to have a job outside the home for the rest of their lives or whatever. I will say that one of the first interview I did with Garnet Kozelik, she's like me, her kidneys behind her eyes, and she was apt to cry. And I asked her somewhat the same question. And she said, well, everybody was excited. We ran together. We danced together at the end of the war. But she said, I happened to glance over to a couple of women who had no place to go, and their job was gone. So, in other words, there were people who really wanted to continue work and were not able to. But by and large, the culture of the time was, you were to be a housekeeper, essentially a good mother and wife, and it was not that much an issue at all. And they were just pleased that they'd won the war. That was their objective.
A lot of these women had husbands who didn't come home from the war.
Gosh.
What did they do?
That's a very good question. One of and also very little, but divorce was starting to be talked about at that time. So there were women who, a lot of men came back mentally unstable and lots of alcoholism. So those women struggled. They really struggled. And there was a couple of different stories that I don't have time to tell you now, but would love to tell you, that have to do with how they just felt totally abandoned. Another group that felt abandoned was the women in Europe who married American men and came here and then found their husbands were alcoholic or abusive. and then they were really lost. And some of them, had to even get the Pope to, or somebody high in the Catholic Church to approve of their divorce. So there was abandonment. There definitely was. That's sounds like a strong word, but some of these women were really lost. They did not know what to do or where to go. And the very few of those came forward. It was usually those that were maybe even, I would say maybe of those I interviewed, maybe somewhere around a third were married when they went into the workforce. But most of them were young women, and they started a marriage and family after the war. But you are absolutely right. There was a sense of abandonment in a lot of people, a lot of women. And I don't really know exactly what that pattern is. It's a good question, and it needs to be researched. Maybe that's a research question for somebody someday.
As a variant to that, as add-on, and Rob's going to cut us off time in just a second. You mentioned the European war brides. There were some also from Asia.
Yes.
I suspect they were even more abandoned than the Europeans, were they not?
Yes, and typically, as I can see it from my 200 interviews, and also to keeping my ear to the ground for others, is the Asian women seem to stay and not go back home. The European women tried to get back home often. Some of them stayed, but many. There's one story. Gosh, I wish I could tell you stories. I'll tell you what, since time is running out, how much time do we have, Rob?
About a minute and a half, Ann.
Somebody name a letter of the alphabet, and I'll tell you a story about a woman with that letter of the alphabet.
All right, Colin.
No X and no Z.
No X and Colin, slide those photos back up so we can get one of the folks from West Virginia who is on the storyboards that you sent there. How about Anna Hess?
Oh, Anna, God love Anna.
I have 1 minute.
1 minute. She grew up in Rome County. They didn't have running water or electricity. They didn't even know the war had, they didn't know about Pearl Harbor. When they went to church and found it out, the boys went the next day and signed up. The older men went into Akron, Ohio. She and her mother took care of the farm, and then they went to Akron, and she became essentially a helper in making tires. And when we lost our rubber because the Japanese blocked it from coming in, we had to have man-made rubber. She's been to Europe, to the Netherlands with us twice. She now has skin cancer, which is not good. And she's a lovely and very straightforward and totally practical person that I totally love. So.
And thanks so much for your time this morning. I always enjoy having you on the program. I look forward to your next visit soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob. It was my pleasure.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
All right, bye now.